Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here today to talk about the book Making Connections with the authors who are all here with us. Making Connections was published a couple of months ago. In pre-COVID days, I always had copies of the books to wave around, but I do never see them anymore. John has one. Hey, there we go. Perfect. So Making Connections offers a practical guide to online intercultural exchanges. For the past 30 years, enthusiastic teachers of language and culture have been connecting individuals and groups of learners via the internet using email, social media, and virtual learning platforms. There are lots of books about this and ideas for online activities, but Making Connections is the first how-to book that we know of to cover the basic practicalities of setting up an online exchange, from finding a partner to turning the experience into a thesis or an article for publication. I'm joined today by the three authors of the book who are going to talk about their work and the book, and then we will take questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat for the webinar, and I will try to get to as many of them as I can at the end of the session. So the three authors have been involved with online exchanges for some years, even decades. I refuse to believe that can be true. John Corbett is now a professor at BNU HKBU, United International College in China. Hugo and Bruno Lima work in different states in Brazil. Hugo is a branch coordinator and English language teacher at Instituto Brasil Estados Unidos in Rio de Janeiro, while Bruno is an English language teacher and international mobility officer at the Federal Institute of Science and Technology at Rio Grande do Norte in Natal. So over to the three of you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to everybody for joining us. Hugo, Bruno, and I have had a quick pre-meeting just to discuss who's going to take these the points in the first half hour when we chat about the book, and then Anna will take your questions, and we'll be able to answer some of your questions then. But we thought we'd begin with Bruno, who will define, for those of you who are new to the topic, he'll define what an online exchange is and what an online intercultural exchange is. So over to you, Bruno.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for attending this meeting. The first thing I have to say about online intercultural exchanges is that it actually puts together, brings into play two very important concepts. The first one is the very idea of an intercultural exchange, an intercultural interaction. For us, every interaction is potentially an intercultural one, since people usually belong to different social groups. For example, the interaction I have with my son at home is usually an intercultural one because he belongs to a different generation as compared to mine. People have different genders, they have different social economic backgrounds. So this all comes together when we talk to someone from different environments. So this is the first idea that comes into play when we talk about online intercultural exchanges. And the second one, of course, is the idea of an online exchange itself. We call it online exchange, but we may see it being referred to as telecollaboration or virtual exchange. It has many possible names. And it's basically the application of online tools and platforms to bridge different groups of people in distant locations. So just to address the topic, John, straight to the point you asked me, an online intercultural exchange would be the use of online tools to bridge groups of different cultural groups, people who are in geographically distant locations. So this is how we could summarize the idea of in discussion in our book.
Yeah, and as Anna says, several of us have actually been working on online intercultural exchanges for decades, as you can see by my grey hair. But over those decades, a lot of books have been written, and editions have been published, some excellent ones by Multilingual Matters, by people like Robert O'Dowd, And over the years, there have been many people talking about the value of online intercultural exchanges. And many people have talked about the kinds of activities that you can do. But it seemed to me, particularly a couple of years ago, when I was writing or revising another book, which you cannot see, but whoops, if I did bring it back, it's an intercultural approach to English language teaching. I was revising this book for Multilingual Matters, and I was writing a new chapter for that book on online exchanges. And as I was writing it, I was increasingly thinking, this should be a book. There should be a how-to book for people who have not been involved in online intercultural exchanges to give people an understanding of both the joys and the sorrows, the challenges, as well as the opportunities of doing this kind of thing. So I was very aware when I was writing the chapter that a longer treatment would be really useful, but I also knew that I didn't want to write it myself. So I got in touch with a couple of people, from the many people that I've been involved in different online intercultural exchanges, but my go-to guy was Hugo Dart in Rio, and he will tell you how the book came about.
Yeah, it has certainly been a long journey, and John has been engaged in these activities and in this kind of initiative for many, many years. My own journey started in 2012 when I went to Nile, and I'm actually a shout out to dignitaries we have here. Alan Pulverness is here. Thank you so much, Alan, for being here with us, and Uwe Paul, who was my teacher, who got me started into the world of intercultural language education. And it was Uwe who, at the end of the course at Nile, the Norwich Institute for Language Education, recommended another book by John, which is this one, Intercultural Language Activities. And this is what got me started, because the very first chapter is about creating an online community, setting up an online community, which I did the year after with a friend from Poland. And thus was born what we then called the Rio-Warsaw Connection. 11 students from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 11 students from a high school in Warsaw, Poland. And following what John described here in this book, and it went really, really well. That led to my first article about it, which I published in this edition of English Teaching Forum in 2015. And that got me in contact with John himself. Look, I read your book, we started the project, it's going really well, and he was very, very kind about it. We got to meet the following year at the Brasiso conference in Brasilia, so that's 2016, and that's when we started working together. 1 year after that, now John and I had already merged by then the two projects we had been doing, so the Rio-Warsaw Connection had now become the Hemispheres Connection. We now had partners in many other countries. And the next year, in 2017, John and Bruno met. And Bruno was also very interested in that and was developing his own version of the project. So we got him to join us as well. And as the three of us, alongside our other partners, kept on developing this initiative and were discovering new ways and new challenges in this kind of practice, we wanted to share our knowledge, our accumulated knowledge. And it's interesting that led to first a book chapter. Well before this book that we are launching today, actually Bruno and I collaborated in a chapter in intercultural foreign language teaching and learning in higher education contexts. And we wrote a chapter called The Hemispheres Connection, which is in this book, alongside another chapter by John himself. And what's interesting is that it was a way for us to practice telecollaboration between us, because you see, Bruno and I wrote the entire chapter and we had it published before we ever met in person. We would only meet in person the year after the book was published. And so we were experiencing how telecollaboration can be done in many different ways, which finally led, as John said, to this book and our attempt, the three of us together, benefiting from the experience, our accumulated experience with all our partners, and really setting a kind of roadmap. And we're going to get into details regarding what the book covers, but a way to make it easier for people, no matter where they are, no matter what their circumstances are, to develop this kind of initiative.
Yeah, I think I know that many people who are watching us will have taken part in an online intercultural exchange or in an online exchange, but we felt that many people still would not have, but would be attracted to the idea. And so we wanted to give a very, very practical guide going from the beginning to the end of the process, from finding a partner to perhaps turning it into a master's thesis or an article or a PhD thesis, as Bruno did. Bruno is our expert because his PhD was based on his intercultural exchange experiences. And so I thought we would turn to Bruno and say, again, quite succinctly, what the benefits for students are of doing this kind of exchange, but also what the benefits for people like us are as staff, as instructors.
Well, the obvious benefits include the opportunity to practice and to develop competencies that are related to negotiation, to openness, and to the attitude that is described in the components of the intercultural communicative competence. These are the obvious benefits. But we also have the benefit of putting people in contact with cultures that are usually displayed in a stereotypical and reduced fashion. For instance, years ago, I had the chance to coordinate a project, an online project, bridging together students in Natal and in Gaza. And both groups had the chance to see the things they have in common, and that were not expected at the moment, because what we know from Gaza on the news, on TV, are unfortunately frequently sad news. And they had the chance to see that, for instance, people in Gaza had a surf club the way we have here in Natal, because we are on the seaside of Brazil. We are in the Brazilian Northeast. And well, this is a very good benefit, because people, through a project, through an intercultural project, people usually go way beyond the surface in contact with other cultures. By the way, I have to say that this project was conducted also by Professor Refat Alarer, that sadly passed away last December because of the crisis that is going on in Gaza. So I would like to highlight that. But his legacy remains in the project and the learning that the Natal-Gaza connection provided to all groups and students.
Yeah. And also talking about the benefits to instructors, the people, the instructors who actually get involved, people like us who get involved in online exchanges. You were talking, I think, earlier before the webinar started about what we get from this kind of experience.
Instructors and coordinators also have their intercultural online exchange before they actually provide that opportunity to students, right? Like Hugo said, we had been in contact and working together for the production of a book chapter, even before meeting in person. So the whole process of negotiation, openness, and the practical terms of the project are before negotiated amongst coordinators. So this is a chance of building rapport and strengthening links between institutions. That I see as a benefit as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I'd like to begin to talk about the unique elements, as we see it, of the book. What made me think initially that a book like this was necessary? A lot of people have talked about different aspects of online exchanges and online intercultural exchanges, but largely from a fairly theoretical and action research perspective. And I thought there was a place for a volume that would talk people through the basic steps of what you need to do to start an online intercultural exchange, which include finding people who are reliable and trustworthy and that you can talk to. How do you do that? That is one of the major difficulties starting out, is finding a reliable partner. And I know that Bruno had a lot to say about that because he experienced quite a lot of difficulties in the early stages when he was looking for partners. So we draw on that experience to talk about how you find a good partner. Once you found a partner, it's equally important to align the goals. And that is a challenge across institutional cultures, across time zones, across different educational systems, across people who might have different ideas about the value of the project that you're embarking on. So a lot of the work goes into the very early stages before you even put the learners in contact with each other. And a lot of them is about aligning your goals, agreeing how you will present the project to the learners, and agreeing a kind of protocol for not just developing the project, but also figuring out how to respond when things go wrong. And often things do go wrong. And we talk a little bit about how to respond when things go wrong. So aligning the goals is probably one of the most important things to do in a project. We have worked with students at different levels of language competence, but also different age groups. So from school children to adults. And particularly with school children, you immediately get into issues around ethics and safety. So there is a chapter on dealing with consent, assent, making sure that particularly younger learners are interacting in a safe environment. The internet can be a difficult and dangerous place. We have to recognize that. We have to put, as far as possible, protocols in place to keep learners safe. And we also need to have ways of responding as instructors if boundaries are overstepped. Now, this is an interesting intercultural issue in itself, because young people around the world are part of a global youth culture. However, young people in different parts of the world also have different discourse styles. And once they get into things like sarcasm, irony, banter, these things can be easily misunderstood across cultures and across languages. So we have to make sure that the learners will be comfortable in those spaces and will communicate positively in those spaces and will learn to reflect on their own ways of communicating if those are found to be inappropriate in another cultural context. So there are all these kind of issues to think about before you start. If you don't think about them, you're liable, like us, over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, to be blindsided by them. So we flag up some of these concerns. Obviously, we can't be comprehensive, but we flag up some of these concerns about ethics and safety and what happens when things go wrong. We do talk about activities. There is no single kind of online intercultural exchange. I know that many people out there will have participated in extremely imaginative exchanges. If Alan Pulverness is out there, I know that he has been involved in setting up book groups, international book groups. And some of these can be the basis for online intercultural exchanges. The Gaza Natal project that Bruno was talking about involved people writing poetry and flash nonfiction about their experience in the northeast of Brazil, in an economically marginalized city, and also in Gaza, an occupied city. And so the students shared the flash nonfiction and the poetry and the short stories, and then got together to discuss them. So that not every online intercultural exchange will be like that, but these are the kinds of things that you can do. Most of the online exchanges that we've been part of have been more ethnographic in origin. For me, one of the great advantages of an online intercultural exchange is not just to go out and explore the culture of the other, it's actually to cast a defamiliarized eye upon your own culture. So I enjoy it when students go out into the streets and look at their own culture through the eyes of other people, or they have to explain their own culture to other people. And so there's a richer understanding of where you're coming from. It's a truly intercultural experience. So we talk about different kinds of activities, and there are many types of activities, and the design of activities. One misconception that I had at the very beginning about the online world was that it was very different from the physical world. In many ways, the online world replicates, projects, and exaggerates aspects of the physical world. So one of the things that you need to do in the online world, in exactly the same way that you need to do it when you walk into a physical classroom, is develop trust, to develop a community spirit, to develop icebreakers, to find out who your co-participants are and what they believe and what they feel and what their tastes are, so that you understand them better, so that you know your audience. And that kind of trust develops over the arc of a project. But you begin normally, as you would begin with an ordinary ELT class, with icebreakers. We also, as Bruno again says, we have a chapter on establishing and maintaining rapport, getting people actually to talk. One of the things that I learned very quickly through the engagement with others was the importance of emotional language, evaluative language, language that expresses emotions. If learners do not have access to emotional language, they cannot communicate across borders. And actually, they probably can't communicate within borders. So affective, with an A, effective language is necessary to be effective. I think Hugo could talk about this for hours, but I think every single intercultural project that I've been part of has never worked out as well as, or in the way that I expected. So you go from kind of compromise and failure, but a kind of naive optimism, and some wonderfully bright moments tend to illuminate the difficulties. I haven't talked to anybody who's been involved in an online exchange who hasn't been to some extent frustrated by it. So one of the things that we wanted our book to do was to say, that's okay. You might go into this with wonderfully optimistic aspirations, and you might agree goals that are tremendously ambitious. But at the end of the day, you're working with a bunch of people who have their own ideas. And sometimes those ideas are very, very exciting, and sometimes they take over. My initial groups of students used to say that I was too intrusive, and they wanted to take over, which is absolutely fine. It's a way of generating autonomy when it works well, but sometimes you have to provide that little bit of support. So the final thing I have to say about the structure of the book, and we agreed that I would talk about the contents, which I'm currently outlining, was that many people also get involved in this kind of activity because they are interested at some point in the future of writing a newsletter article about it, getting published in some format, perhaps writing a more serious academic scholarly journal article about it, or like Bruno and possibly Hugo in the future, writing a postgraduate thesis based on the data that is gathered through this kind of thing. So we talk about the necessity of getting consent, permissions in advance. If you're even thinking of doing this kind of thing, you have to get consent in advance. So we go through the protocols of the things to think about if you're thinking of turning this into your own article or thesis. because we're drawing upon data that we're getting from human subjects. And again, for us as scholars and teachers and writers, there are academic ethical questions about that. So from the very beginning, we've always said to students, everything that you do, we will anonymize, but we would like to publish it in pedagogical material. If you are unhappy with this, you have the right to withdraw it. You have the right not to be exploited as data. But in our experience, most people are quite happy. And some people are actually irritated that we anonymize them, but we tend to use data anonymously. So these are the kinds of things that we do. One other thing that I forgot to mention, which I have done only to a certain extent, but I know that Hugo and Bruno have done this more, and that is at some point, we have mainly done asynchronous written communication. So people work in social media or virtual learning environments, or even in the early days by email. But Bruno and Hugo have both had experience of video linking students at some point in a course across time zones. You try to find a convenient time where people can meet up face to face. And I just wondered if we could conclude our part of this before we switch over to Anna and take questions, of talking about the benefits of actually seeing people face to face. And perhaps, Bruno, you could talk about that, because I know that you did that with the Natal-Gaza exchange. And that was one of the highlights, I believe, of that particular exchange.
Yes, I'd love to, but Hugo, would you like to talk about the planning first? The planning of synchronous sessions first?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, there are some essential elements that we have learned we need to be careful with. So starting with some of the elements that are necessary to consider when planning the exchange as a whole, namely the kind of platform you're going to use. So when you're thinking about a live meeting, a platform like the one we're using right now, Zoom, has tremendous advantages, but might not be the most appropriate one in some cases. Sometimes because depending on where they are, students might not be able to access it. Sometimes because there are certain technical requirements that make it difficult. So once you have the idea of doing a live synchronous session, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to choose where it's going to take place. And because in our respective workplaces and contexts, we are used to certain kinds of software that work really well and that we are comfortable with, we might not take into account the fact that they may make the meeting very, very difficult for some people. So you want to take that into account. You want to make sure that you have a plan that will allow participants to engage and feel comfortable doing that. One thing we have to remember is that if they are used to engaging asynchronously, if they are used to simply posting messages and writing a little something, maybe posting a video here, now faced with the perspective of talking face to face in a way, many of them get shy and embarrassed, and maybe they're ashamed of what they perceive as a lack of linguistic competence, or they feel that appearing on camera or even talking on camera might reveal more of themselves and of their circumstances that they would like to. So all of that needs to be thought of very carefully. And you want to have a sequence of activities, a sequence of steps that allows them to progressively feel more comfortable. Using breakout rooms, if done properly, can really, really help with that. And we have had experiences in which at first it was very, very hard to get people to participate and to share something. But then because we guided them in such a manner, towards the end of the session, everybody wanted to speak, everybody wanted to say something. More people were opening their cameras, and it becomes very exciting. So we had a couple of experiences with that, but Bruno certainly has something to share about that.
Well, what I would like to say is that besides pre-assigning tasks to help students get engaged in the synchronous activities, is that we predict this face-to-face exchange, synchronous exchange. After a few weeks, they have already interacted asynchronously. So they would have enough time to build rapport, to interact with other people's posts, to get in touch with each other so that they can have the chance to meet online, face-to-face, synchronously, and talk about their experiences and their views of the intercultural exchange project.
Yep, thank you guys. I think it's now probably time to take questions, Anna, if we have any.
Yes, thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. So the first question is from Alan Pulvernes, and he says, can you give any examples of ways in which you recommend resolving misunderstandings between culturally distinct youth discourses in different locations?
Yes, that's actually a very difficult one. But what we do is very, very simple. I mean, it's not a surprising solution. It's basically we monitor what is being said. The students know that we're monitoring what's being said, and if there is a problem, and I think we can give you an example. We talk about some examples in the book. But for example, I work in China, and Chinese youth discourse, particularly for younger children, is very polite, very cute, very kind of, I will lay my soul bare for you and tell you how much my love for Hello Kitty is, you know. So there's a very kind of innocent discourse pattern amongst many Chinese. I'm not saying that all Chinese students are innocent, but there's a discourse of innocence that is there, and particularly for younger kids. And there was another student, I can't remember where from, but not from China, who began to tease or humiliate, certainly attack the discourse of one of the other younger students. So we do what any kind of parent would do at that point, or any sensible teacher, I hope, which was basically take the two people aside and try to explain what was going on offline. And certainly all of the courses that we've been involved in, there is at least an oversight element. There is often continual monitoring by the teachers. Sometimes the teachers participate, sometimes they don't. But certainly there's the opportunity to take the participants aside and say, look, this is a learning moment. This is not the kind of discourse that is appropriate in this kind of context, so please reflect on this. And we've never found any pushback with that. We try to teach it as a learning experience, but we are very conscious that people, if this is going to work, the participants have to be comfortable in the learning space. So if somebody makes another person uncomfortable because they think it's funny, or because they're amusing, or because that's banter is the discourse that bonds them in that particular culture, we have to say, look, this is not appropriate, or not appropriate yet in this context. So basically taking people aside and talking to them, and having the possibility of deleting anything that might be offensive. And often, not always, but often, for many of our participants, there's a kind of in-class element and an online element. So the people who are involved in the course are also meeting as classes or as groups. So there's a possibility of a group discussion about a critical incident. You can, one of the nice things about online intercultural exchanges is you can look back at the discourse and say, look, that happened.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
Is that a good thing? One other very quick old example that I used, which was not offensive, but there was a group that I was having that was quite happily talking about their favourite soft drinks, which was not a topic I had chosen, but it was one that they had chosen. And into this came a question about the status of women in the East and the West. And the people who were involved were very unhappy because they thought they were being exploited to answer someone's essay question. And they were. But then we talked about it and we said, well, you know, how do we deal with this? And one of the group posted a response and tried to elicit the students' own views about this. And it was like a conversation that took a sidebar. There was a kind of side topic for about 3 or 4 turns, and then it came back to soft drinks again. And everybody was okay with that. But you have to do some kind of damage management quite often as a teacher. So we talk about these kinds of situations where things go off the rails and the instructor has to kind of intervene to bring them back onto the rails. Again, one of my naive ideas at the very beginning was that, oh, internet, just get the students together, they will have happy conversations. And that doesn't happen. The teacher, Robert O'Dowd says this, the teacher is still necessary. The teacher is still necessary as someone who can monitor and manage things that are going off the rails, but also as a prompt to reflect. Because often in this kind of activity, in my experience, the students don't actually understand what they have learned until close to the end. They just think they're having conversation. So, but then if you prompt them to be reflective, they start going deeper into the kinds of topics that they've been covering and how they've been covering.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's one thing I took away from the book is that it's the teacher's still got to do the teaching, and that kind in the same way that you would in a in-person classroom, isn't it? And it's not just a question of going, I've set up a little Twitter and I'm going to let you all have at it. It's you've still got to do all that kind of monitoring and intervening and directing, and yeah, that's really great. Did anyone else want to add for that, or shall we go on to the next question?
Just very quickly, just to highlight 2 elements of John's response. One is the importance of immediate reaction. So you want to be there and every step of the way, because they may be writing at any point. So as soon as something like that shows up, you want to be able to catch it straight away before it becomes something bigger, and it will. So the response must be immediate. And this also connects with the importance of choosing good partners, because you are counting on those people not only to help you monitor what's going on, but also to be your partners in how you react to that and how you deal with the offending parties. So everybody needs to be on the same page. So I mean, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of having all these previous conversations and agreeing not only goals, but also our conduct, how we're going to deal with different situations. So that can make all the difference.
Yeah, thank you. So the second question is, and it's from Uwe Paul. First of all, congratulations on this wonderful achievement. It relates to the first question. They're interested in the potential conflicts among participants, which you refer to in the book. These days, many things may be perceived as offensive in an intercultural exchange related to ethnicity, religion, social status, gender, political affiliation, sexual orientation. Often it's not clear, though, what actually counts as an offence rather than the perception of offence. In your experience, has the nature of such conflicts changed? And what do you recommend to instructors in terms of preparing students for this, apart from monitoring and responding to questions?
Okay, I'll go with this, and maybe then I'll turn to Bruno because he's much wiser than I am. It's a difficult question to answer, Uwe, because every group is different, and a lot will depend upon the age and the maturity of the students that you're doing this with. I started off doing this with undergraduate students at Glasgow University, and students in Taiwan and Argentina, with Andrea Sente Del Rio and Peggy Liu in Taiwan. And I remember my co-instructor at Glasgow knocking at my door and coming in saying, "We've had our first person coming out in the online exchange, and we had a gay student who began to talk about his sexuality and answer questions about his sexuality." And this, this was one of my first exchanges, and we weren't terribly sure how to deal with this. So I did what I would normally do, and I kind of pulled him in, and I said, "You realize this is public. You realize that the platform at that time, the platform that we were using was not a closed platform. We had made this, I thought, clear to the students that anybody at that time could log in and observe. They couldn't participate, but they could observe the interactions. And I just wanted to make sure that he was happy that what he was displaying about himself was open to the world and not just the group. And he was very happy, and he was very articulate about what he was doing. And he said it was actually very, very important to him to be able to engage. And he said actually this was one of the most satisfying things that he was doing at university in his final year of an honours degree, was actually having the opportunity to discuss this with his peers in Glasgow. And it was interesting, it was as much in Glasgow as abroad. So it was local as well as the overseas. And I learned from that experience that I should step back and trust the students. Now, you can't always trust the students, but I think one of the things you've got to give the students is actually space to develop. We cannot, in my view, lay down rules about what is offensive and not offensive. In some ways, the students have to find this out for themselves. And sometimes the preconceptions that we have, the students blindside us because they're wiser than we are about how they're going to cope with this. But I think the red line for me is if a student is going to feel threatened or offended. And my intention in talking to the student who was talking about his own sexuality was to make sure that he felt safe, that he wasn't giving away more than he would be happy with later on, and to make sure that he was very aware of the potential consequences and he turned out to be very confident about approaching them. So he became a kind of star in that particular exchange. He was kind of the go-to guy for interviews, ethnographic interviews. But that was a group of undergraduate university students. I wouldn't do that with a group of 12-year-olds, perhaps. So again, a lot depends upon the students, how they trust each other, what their age maturity is, and whether you're going to get flack from parents, quite frankly. I don't know, Bruno, if you've got anything to add.
Yes, what I usually do is trying to use pre-service strategies and in-service strategies, right? As pre-service strategies, I try to elicit sensitive topics with the class, the group of students, and then try to work on a differentiation between invasive questions and exploratory questions. For instance, money is usually a sensitive topic, no matter what culture we are dealing with. So instead of asking, how much do you earn a month? We decide to ask, what is the per capita income of your region or something like that. So this is a way to explore, to address the topic of money, to explore a little bit more of their interest and not being invasive to someone's personal life. So this is a pre-service, a set of pre-service strategies I usually use. And as an in-service strategy, what I do is using a reflexive journal. So as they write about their experience, their online experience, they will tell us, not only me as a teacher, but also the group of students, what they learned with the interaction and how they felt about it, so that we can discuss those feelings and how to address them later on during the project. We usually have time as we carry on asynchronous interactions, usually written ones, we usually have time to reflect, revise, and rewrite the texts, to go back to them and see what we can get and what we can learn from the text and from the experiences. So the reflective journals help a lot on that.
Brilliant, thank you. And as a follow-up to that, I was wondering about whether any of you had anything to say about what students can get from online exchange over and above the obvious kind of convenience and cost, and are there things that they can get out of being able to speak to each other online, either in text or on video, that they might not get so much from sitting in a room together? Are people willing to discuss topics that they might be uncomfortable discussing face to face, or is it the opportunity for that kind of in-class discussion about different discourse styles? And I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with, I think Bruno's made some really, really important points, that the online exchange is like the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the learning goes in the rehearsal and the reflection. And I think a good online intercultural exchange that works, and they don't all work, but one that works, is one that allows opportunity for rehearsal, and then there is the experience itself, which usually surprises you. You can't usually anticipate in the rehearsal what's actually going to come up, but then you reflect on that. And so that's a kind of deep learning that might not happen if you're just a kind of tourist, or if you're just sitting in a room having an individual discussion. There isn't that space for rehearsal and reflection. And I think for me, the difference about being a tourist is the fact that you're as engaged with your home culture as you are with the other culture, because you're having to formulate. And people, the number of people that I have talked to who are actually surprised by the things that they find in their own everyday context. Just an example of that is one activity that we often get people to do is to describe a franchise cafe that is near you, like your local Starbucks. And we talk about globalization. But once people start comparing the decor, the prices, what is actually an offer, there are areas of commonality. There's also areas of localization that are going on. And if you start taking a look at the people who are using the Starbucks and how they're ordering and where they're sitting and how they're interacting, then you can actually see these local inflections coming out. So you get the local and the global being contrasted. And that is something that you wouldn't get in this. I mean, if you go to Starbucks in another country, you might not notice that. But if you're actually being prompted to pay attention, these are the things that you begin to become a better noticer, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. We have another question from Lan Wang. If I want to conduct some cultural exchange activities between my students who are US college students and students who are college students in Beijing, as well as in Hong Kong, either curriculum or extracurricular activities, what would be your suggestions for the themes of the activities? We also have time zone difference in addition to cultural, language, social norms, etc.
Well, I don't want to hog the replies, but because I teach in China, I'll say something briefly about that. I mean, I've worked in Macau, and now I work in mainland China. So a lot depends on finding, as Hugo said, a reliable partner. So if you know somebody, that helps. We tend to kind of work with extending friend networks. So you find someone you know and trust, and that becomes the basis of the partnership. There are a couple of things that you need to bear in mind if you're working with China. And one is, as Hugo again has said, the technology. Zoom might not be an issue. You don't get access to Google Meets. No matter how often you tell participants that they can't get access necessarily to YouTube or WhatsApp, they post YouTube videos, which is very frustrating if you're getting if people say this, watch this is brilliant, and you can't access it. So these are some of the practical issues that we discuss in the book. There are also clearly ideological issues. I would love for my students in China to have a free-flowing, frank political discussion with Bruno's students or Hugo's students. But I also know that I don't want my students to get in trouble because the platforms will be monitored. And if they're not monitored externally, there may well be some students internally who are doing the monitoring. And again, my first concern all the time is the safety of the students. So there are many things that can be talked about. The kinds of activities that are in the book, sadly, that is not published by Multilingual Matters, the Intercultural Language Activities book by Cambridge University Press, that Hugo talked about, these are kind of largely observational ethnographic activities that get people to observe their local realities and then try to get a sense of the local reality. That's like public spaces, private spaces, how do people interact? There were, and it was difficult for me with Cambridge University Press, that not so fine publisher as Multilingual Matters, but it was very, very difficult for me to get them even to address topics of religion, politics, and sex. We are British, so I got the religion and the politics, but I didn't get the sex. But they insisted that on every page of activities that are addressing politics and religion, I had to have a warning sign saying this is sensitive. And I would be very careful about using those kind of activities in a country like China or in other countries that we work with people in Israel as well as Gaza. I don't know, Nawa Nasser may be watching, so a shout out to her. So we work very positively with people in Israel as well as Gaza. We talk to them about areas that are no-go areas, simply because whether you like it or not, if you talk about these, the students might be put in some kind of difficult situation.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that people observe those protocols for given places and exchanges.
Yeah. That's great. And it's that because I think when you initially proposed the book, I was thinking, oh, it's going to be a book of activities, fabulous. And actually that's a very small part of it, and it's all that kind of scaffolding and relationship building and discussion in advance of even letting the students anywhere near it that enables this to happen and to work as well as it ever does.
Yeah, that's what we felt. I mean, there are activity books. There are activity books going back to the 1990s, and they're great. If you change email into social media, they're still great activities. Technology changes very fast. One of our platforms shut down as we were writing the book. We had to change all the names. So things change very fast, but we felt that nobody out there was talking about what happens when your partner disappears. What happens when one of your students gets into a terrible fight with another student? What happens when the technology breaks down? It makes it sound like hard work, and it is hard work. But I think, and I'll let Hugo, Hugo does this much more eloquently than I do. But the joy is when it works well. And I think the experience for the students when it works well, very, very rich indeed. But Hugo, you might want to say something about that because you've done this more consistently than I have.
Yeah, I think the excitement that we share in sharing this book and what we have learned from it comes directly from our excitement about what we learned doing these activities, and we see how it transforms students. Now, it is true that thanks to modern technology, students can have access to content from all over the world, but they only get to develop human relationships, even without the benefit of actually traveling, if properly guided. And we have found these kinds of online intercultural exchanges, if properly managed, can be a fantastic way of expanding their horizons. Going back to what Bruno was just saying, allowing them to reflect on their own culture, allowing them to rediscover their own culture, allowing them to look at the other as somebody with whom they actually may have a lot in common. And it is by discovering the differences that they realize how much they have in common. And for us, it's incredibly transformative. And I know that our time is limited, so I'm just going to mention one moment that was transformative for me. Back at the beginning, before it all started for me, in the Nile course in 2012, in that classroom in Norwich, I was in a classroom with 14 other teachers or 15 other teachers. They were all European. They were all women. I was the only one who was not European, not a woman, but I was very lucky because I had in Uwe a teacher who was an incredible mediator, an incredible guide, and he made me feel comfortable. He made us all feel comfortable with each other, so that it didn't matter. These differences did not matter at all. We were there starting a journey of discovering, and I think that's all we've been trying to do. To continue this journey of discovery, which is also a journey of self-discovery. And we have found that these kinds of projects can be incredibly beneficial and, in the long run, transform entire generations of people who now, with access to technologies that you can't even dream of, who knows where artificial intelligence will lead us, who know what's coming after artificial intelligence. These are people who will have the human equipment to address all of that.
Thank you. I think we probably got to wrap it up there. Sorry, we couldn't get to all of your questions. I think it's a sign of an interesting book that we get far too many questions in these things. So my colleagues have put the discount code up again, which you can use to get 50% off the book on our website. It's already a bargain price. Thank you so much for joining me today, John and Bruno and Hugo. And thank you to everyone who's watched. This will be available on YouTube next week or the week after, probably. So if you want to watch again, you can do. But for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And
Thank you.
thanks to everyone.